Hey everyone, welcome to Punkcast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk 9527. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Good morning, everyone. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Punkcast. Today, we're back with Punk 6303, with three addies, Frown, Small Shades, and the dope purple cap. In real life, he's a man of many talents. Being the handyman engineer at Artblocks, he's also an artist, collector, and investor. Please welcome my man, Perpat, to the show. Perpat, how are you, man?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I think your name's popped up a few times from some real OGs in the space, especially in the Artblocks sort of area. It'd be good to sort of unpack your personal sort of punk story. Maybe we could start with your handle, and it sounds pretty intuitive in terms of why you selected Perpat, but I'd love to hear how you arrived at your online nickname, Perpat.
Yeah, so I got my punk somewhat serendipitously, like in an unexpected way in terms of how I ended up with, 6303. And I don't know, I like the purple hat trait. Like, I think it's a pretty iconic punk trait. And I just found it like really strange at the time that no one had already claimed purple hat.eth as like an ENS. I just was like, oh, this is a bizarre thing that this isn't already taken. Of course, I'm going to take this. And then, I was just like, oh, this has a nice ring to it. I'm going to start using this as kind of my online moniker. It's has a more of a like crypto native feel to it, I guess, than using something that's more, I don't know, human named. And so that was kind of the gist of it. And then, unfortunately, the purple hat Twitter handle is taken by a woman who I believe has a real physical purple hat that she likes or something like that is the impression I get. But I've reached out to her. It's like, hey, I buy your handle off you. But to no avail there, I haven't gotten a response. So I kind of went with the next best thing, which was, dropping the LE and just sticking with Perp hat. Because, I think I don't know, people ended up friends would just call me Perp, because it's nice and short compared to purple hat. So, it's like Perp hat is close enough and it's available on Twitter. So
that's super cool. Perp sounds almost a nickname for perpetrator as well. So it's a good double nickname.
It's true. Without you have to have it with the spelling, otherwise it could be misconstrued.
And it sounds like Perp hat also means that this is definitely your forever punk, because it might be a little bit weird to call you Perp hat after you sell your purple hat punk.
That's true, though. There are other purple hatted punks. If I see something, that's a better fit. I can't say that I'm beholden forever to 6303. But I have a pretty sentimental attachment to my punk. So
that's true. Well, I think Flamingo DAO has a pretty big bias towards purple hats too. So I think they've been collecting up the purple hats.
Yeah, they have the purple hatted alien, which is pretty cool punk. I have to say. Yeah, there's a lot of cool purple hatted punks just in the ecosystem in general.
I guess the only other one that comes to mind is Jordan Lyle as well. So he's got that.
Jordan has one. Gary Vee has a handful of purple hatted punks he's collected. Beauty and the Punk, I want to say. I think she has a purple hatted ape. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know. Those are the ones that immediate. Oh, Aaron Wright, I know, rocks a purple hatted punk.
He does. He does. He's a perp as well. Nice.
A lot of purple hats out there.
Well,
and that's the thing that's crazy. I don't know how no one had claimed the ENS. That was like the thing that was most shocking me.
Well, welcome, Perpat. It'd be great to sort of start off, I guess, just learning a little bit more about your sort of personal backstory before we get into, I guess, the crypto and NFT sort of part of your life. But what were you doing before crypto and everything sort of leading before that? Like, where'd you grow up, and what'd you study?
Yeah, so I come from kind of a background in I don't know, mostly computer science. I studied computer science at school. I kind of left school early to start startup actually, and kind of slowly finished my degree online. Startup was in a very different space than crypto. And what I'm currently doing is kind of building like next generation human computer interfaces in the form of haptic displays. So it's like creating a stack of hardware and software that would allow you to create patterns that like draw on people's skin. So that was really cool. We kind of ran that company for about 3 years and ended up winding things down after not really being able to find like a strong enough product market fit, but did a lot of cool work, like did this really cool project with NASA, making this kind of trippy like haptic displays that go into an armband. And yeah, my background is just someone who's like really interested in technology and software and product development. And so kind of came out of that experience, did a little bit of consulting work, found myself at Google as an engineer. I'd worked there for a couple of years and was really enjoying that when the opportunity to join Artblocks, arose after kind of finding and meeting Eric via Discord and becoming a really active member of the Artblocks community. And so that's what I'm doing now. I wear the CTO hat over at Artblocks and try to make sure kind of we're swimming in the right direction in terms of technical direction for the company. And so that's been a lot of fun. But yeah, my background is kind of scattered all over the place in terms of like the specific technologies that I've worked on, but kind of consider myself like tinkerer, a generalist, an engineer, someone who likes to learn new things. And finding crypto is just kind of born out of that interest of technology, but also deep interest in economics, and kind of like probably was exposed to the Bitcoin white paper. I don't know when, maybe like before 2016, but it was like, oh, this is interesting, but like didn't really sink in until started more actively really paying attention to crypto like end of 2016, beginning of 2017, around like learned about one of my close friends and former co-founders was in the same Teal Fellowship class with Vitalik. And so like, I think that's probably what put, I don't know, the combination of that and kind of generally paying attention to crypto, I think was what like put the Ethereum pre-sale launch kind of on like my radar. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like you're kind of taking some of this crypto economic stuff, but building something that's like more generalized and more kind of allows for a more like actualized vision of this programmable money. And so like, that's when I started really paying attention more just as someone who was curious and interested in the technology, and kind of like tinkered around in the space. Spent about a year like doing some open source contribution work to Viper, but like didn't really work professionally in crypto until I started Artblocks. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Yeah, no, awesome. There's a couple interesting things I'd love to sort of unpack there with you, but just come back to your startup. Like, what do you sort of mean by haptics and the hardware component of it, like in drawing on on your skin? Like, what was, I guess, what was the hypothesis of what the product would be then, and the use cases for it?
Yeah. So, generally speaking, like haptic devices are devices that communicate with your body via your sense of touch. And what we were building was like these haptic, well, from a hardware perspective, haptic displays that would allow you to create animations that kind of played on top of illusions that the body will perceive in touch. So like a video, when you watch a video, you're not actually watching something that is moving. You're watching, a series of frames that are played fast enough that it tricks your brain into the illusion of perceiving motion, let's say. And kind of similar to that, like you can create illusions of motion on your skin, where let's say you have like 2 points on your arm, and there's like little vibrating motors on those 2 different points. If you create a sensation that eases from one to the other, kind of at the right timing, the right intensities, you can create the illusion of something moving across your skin, kind of like in a linear way, let's say, for example. And so what we built was this, a hardware stack that would allow you to build displays of, I think, up to 8 actuators that you could kind of configure in different configurations. And then this software design toolkit that was like essentially like Adobe Flash, but for haptics. You create different patterns that felt like they were, moving around, evoking senses of like something that feels kind of creepy, something that feels kind of warm and comforting. Where we started was like focusing actually more on a consumer device. And, that was like, it was called Moment. It was this like kind of a smartwatch without a screen. And so the idea was that you could communicate things like caller ID, and the passage of time, and unique alarms and reminders, all with just touch, and you would have that as something like you didn't have to look at, but you could kind of convey information that way. Had some moderate success there in getting that initial product out the door, but like wasn't an area where there was opportunity for like kind of additional traction. And so kind of pivoted from that into like more of this design suite, kind of like this design toolkit that could be put into like more of kind of industrial and military context. So like, the form factor that would fit inside of a helmet or like a hard hat, or, that would fit like alongside your back or like inside of an armband. And, there was a lot of interest there in terms of like, worked with some Fortune 500 companies and their design teams like interested in using the toolkit to explore the haptic design space, you could say. And then, did like an interesting project with NASA for some research that they were doing for like next generation spacesuits. But yeah, ultimately, like couldn't really find the right, I don't know, product market fit there. And, candidly, the sales cycle for selling to like the military or the government is pretty long. And so, ended up in a place where like, yeah, we're running out of grant funding, running out of some of this initial capital. This isn't really like the kind of the fit that we would hope to have found, and decided to kind of wind things down. But yeah, it was a really interesting, I don't know, experience. Is really interesting. I think like, one of the things that we say is like, my previous co-founders, like being too early is this functionally equivalent to being wrong. And I do like sincerely believe that was the case in the stuff we were working with. Is like, it's been, like 8 years or something now since we started working on that stuff. And like now I think we're starting to see like maybe we're going to see more. I mean, we've seen little pieces of more advanced haptic stuff drip out in consumer technology, but like I think we were just way too early. And I think there's more applications for this technology as like VR and AR expand as a market category. Like if we can get that right in a consumer context, I'm pretty excited about what's happening in the Vision Pro and like where that goes. Like maybe we'll find, yeah, I don't know, like that we will see some of that technology come more into, let's say, like the mainstream field of view. But yeah, we were pretty early, which is the same as being wrong from the perspective of what the market cares about. So that was kind of how that saga evolved.
No, that's super interesting. I think you're right. I think as you're sort of talking through, Apple's Vision Pro hardware that's coming out, would have been ideally probably a good use case for it. Because I don't know if you've been to those 4D movies before. Because as you were sort of talking,
Yeah.
I went to see one of those where basically they've got these, I don't know, almost like air sort of pockets at the back of your seat. And so like when bullets are sort of flying, you're feeling like air sort of you can feel some of that, right? Which was kind of cool and a unique sort of experience. But I could sort of see that, with this AR, VR stuff coming on soon, people are gonna want, maybe a virtual suit or some way to sort of interact and feel that sense of touch as they're sort of engaging with people. I mean, if you're in a room, in a meeting or something like that, how do you shake somebody's hand or how do you sort of pat somebody on the back virtually? So I think as you're sort of thinking, yeah, it sounds like a pretty cool thing that probably it was too early at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information that you can convey via touch, and even just subtle differences between like, you know, a nice soft hand on a shoulder versus like a firm hand on a shoulder can communicate, very different things. And I think like, yeah, I mean, I think there's some pretty cool stuff that like Apple's already done with haptics in terms of like, the virtual touchpad, like the click on the new MacBooks isn't real. It's like a flat pane of glass that, they simulate a click by like getting you a haptic response when, there's enough, downward pressure on the device. Like that's pretty cool. I mean, just the haptics and like the Apple Watch, the click wheel, like there's a lot of really sophisticated stuff to even just create these very subtle, but meaningful kind of haptic feedback experiences. And yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty excited to see, like, I think as you have more immersive experiences, you can continue to add on to that with, layers of additional like multimodal pieces. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see kind of where this stuff goes. And yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting.
No, super fascinating, man, and I love hearing this sort of stuff. I think nerding out and sort of seeing where this stuff goes. But maybe going a little bit further into your background history, like of all the things you could have chosen to sort of study and get into, like how did you land in computer science? Like what sort of drew you to that sort of space?
um, yeah, I mean, like partially convenience. So like I think when I was, well, one is just like, I think there is a genuine, just like deep intellectual curiosity. I think that's like satisfied by understanding how computers work, and like just something that's very satisfying about being able with software to like, have an idea about something or a hypothesis about the world and like build something that tries to validate or invalidate that in a really like tight feedback loop. When I was in university, I charted around with different kind of like dual degree things that I was exploring. And so like the pragmatic part of why I ended up like finishing my degree in computer science was mostly just due to the fact that, I left university early to start this haptic startup with some folks that were a couple years older than me. And so, yeah, like the computer science degree was one that I could finish slowly online remotely. And so that's what I ended up finishing my degree in. But like I also spent, time in school. Like I finished a minor in philosophy. I almost finished a minor in math. And, it was like one class from finishing a minor in math and one class from finishing a minor in economics. At one point it was like double majoring in math and originally double E and computer science, and then math and computer science. And it was just kind of pragmatically like, I'm not gonna be able to finish this. I do want to finish a degree. This is the one I'm going to be able to finish. But like, I think for me, like the intellectual interests are, I don't know, multidisciplinary in terms of like things that are exciting to me. I think, like economics in particular is a pretty interesting field of study and thinking from the perspective of like the intersection of, let's say like more quantitative modes of thinking and modeling and more like psychological interests in human behavior and decision making. So that was a lot of fun, like for me, just from an intellectual curiosity perspective. But yeah, I don't know, kind of a blend of like being interested in kind of having the skill set to make things, I think is like something that was fundamentally, let's say, driving. Like, I think that was what was interesting about Double E, just like, oh, like I can build something from like starting at circuit design and kind of like, what is the skill set I need to build, you know, physical technical products, while like understanding how you design electronics, like that's useful. That's like, interesting. It gives me more tools to like think about making stuff. And then kind of from that found like, oh, well, also software gives you a lot of tools for making stuff. And so, yeah, I think that was a big driver for me, in addition to just like, I don't know, things that are challenging, interesting, exciting areas to find new problems. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of a mixed bag.
No, that's cool. And along that sort of journey in your early years, did you ever have an interest in art or collecting in any form or
Yeah.
creating?
So, I think from like a personal perspective, art has always been a pretty like important aspect of my life and my family. Like growing up, my dad was a professional dancer when he was younger and then a dance professor. And so from that perspective, like art and culture and kind of dance and theater were always like important in my life growing up. My grandparents on my dad's side were kind of, both of them were, one set of the grandparents were both like visual artists, kind of more focused in printmaking and filmmaking. Actually, this quilt is something that my grandmother made. And so I think that was always like something that I was exposed to in life, and kind of grew up around like these works of art. My family growing, or my house growing up, and family members like aunts, uncles, grandparents' house growing up that were kind of created by my people that were close to me. And I think in high school was like more deeply, let's say, actively making art from the perspective of being really involved in our photography program and being really interested in photography, and kind of kept pursuing like that from a personal perspective, a couple of years into university. And then I think, you know, from a more like formal study perspective, never pragmatically, I don't know, I'm like the oldest of my siblings. I think like, pragmatically being like, okay, I need to figure out a way to like make a career and be a good example in that respect. Like art was not a pathway that, was, I don't know, like seemed to be one that made sense in a lot of ways. And so like, I remember kind of like junior, senior year of high school being like, oh, should I like try to get into a design program and like, go to like an art and design school, or like, should I do something more pragmatic and like study engineering? And I think it was like, oh, like I'm gonna do the pragmatic thing. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of been like my relationship art. I never was really exposed to like creating art with code until I found Dartblocks actually, and was like, oh shit, like they're, like E5JS is a thing, and people like, make art for the sake of art with code, and, are not just like, I don't know. For me, I've always thought about writing software as a creative exercise. It's like like writing prose in certain ways, right? I mean, it's a different form of thinking, but like there can be creativity and like the kind of the design and implementation of software. And so like, I don't know, I think that's been that was always satisfying to me about writing software, but had never been exposed to like, oh, like there are these, frameworks and entire communities that are built around like using code to create art. And so, yeah, I think when I like found Art Blocks, which was by way of like seeing ringers being talked about by DC Investor and other uh, crypto Twitter people I've been following, just due to like that being my entry point into keeping tabs on what's happening in the world of crypto. Like, it's like, oh, this is really cool, and it really like struck a chord. I think just from my background of like being interested in software, having experience growing up around art, especially growing up around a lot of like work that was created, with printmaking techniques. This like one of X concept that Art Blocks is built on top of was felt like a very like digitally native version of screen printing where you have like one of 100 and they're all like, much more the same. I mean, they are unique different pulls from a given, a plate or a screen or whatever. But yeah, I don't know, the kind of like digital version of that with more variety because their algorithmic outputs really resonated, and I just found out the rabbit hole pretty quickly from there.
No, that's super fascinating too, because it sounds well. First of all, it sounds like you're a super genius being able to go down all these rabbit holes and find your way through. Because there are some very technical aspects of it. But I mean, I think as you're sort of talking, I could sort of relate to elements of it, right? I think on the one side, I think there is, do you think mostly with your heart or do you think mostly with your head? The engineering side, which is, black and white mathematical side versus the creativity side. And I always find that it always feels like they're always in conflict with each other. But I think you found a really nice sweet spot with art blocks along that sort of journey. But how did you I guess how did you find your way into sort of art blocks and find that transition? And was it an easy one for you to sort of rationalize at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think like maybe there's different ways to think about that question and answer it. Like I think from like a you know artist perspective, like I start with like, oh, like I want to make something that creates a feeling or like a that sparks imagination in a certain direction, right? Like I want to try to transport someone to either like you know think about like a place that's important to them, or think about a place that I'm trying to you know show is important to me, or like think about, like having a more deep relationship with like trying to understand how this algorithm works and what the relationship is code is. And so it's like, what do I want the person to feel? And then it's like, maybe that's from where my analytical part of my brain takes over. And it's like, okay, how do I construct this thing? And like, what are the building blocks for making, this thing and dissecting it into code and like thinking about it and kind of that way and like going back and forth from that perspective. I think yeah, I don't know. I think from the perspective of like, getting more involved in like art blocks from the perspective of the community and like, joining the team and working on things in that respect. Like, I don't know how much they're in conflict as much as they're just like, different. I don't know. Like the work forces you to think about, what art blocks does from different perspectives, right? It's like, okay, like what are our artists expecting? What are our collectors expecting? Like, what does the product need from a technical perspective? What does the product need from a philosophical perspective in terms of like what does it mean to be on chain and what constraints and requirements does that drive in terms of like how the product works? And so I think there's like a lot of I don't know, like back and forth there of just like taking lots of different perspectives. And, for me, it's I think useful to like to come to that table with a background or an experience that like has worn, in terms of our blocks as a product, lots of different hats. Like I've, started as a collector, and then community member and then artist and then like team member. And so I don't know, interacted with the product in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's just like helpful when it comes to yeah.
Maybe you could share how did you stumble across art blocks to start with?
Yeah. So, it was that like I think seeing ringers on the timeline and being like, what the fuck is like what is this? Like trying to understand, I had used OpenSea before, just from the perspective of like, I don't know, like a long time ago, like having crypto kitties and then being kind of like, oh, what's happening still on the, like crypto ecosystem. And I like lost my, or the NFT ecosystem, I lost my wallet, but like, I want to keep tabs on things. So like, I think, from that perspective, I was able to kind of like reverse engineer from Ringers to eventually like find my way to the Artblocks website and was like, okay, cool. This is what this is. And then like somewhere buried at the time, it felt very buried. Like maybe it was in an about section at the bottom of the, page was like, oh, like join our Discord community. And I had never like been in part of a public Discord server. So I was like, I don't know what this is all about. And kind of joined the Discord server. And it was like I think a very different place than it is now, just in terms of like the scale of people. And so, I think there was like, yeah, not as much activity going on. And so it's a lot easier to like engage with, just like, oh, there's a handful of people here. I can quickly find my way around all of the things, if that makes sense. Because there's just not a ton of them. There's like a handful of projects at the time, and found this really magical place where they're like, and I think this is something that we've been able to maintain is like, a community of moderators and community members that were really interested in like helping you understand what was going on and really patient and generous with their time. And so like, this is really cool. The artists were directly there in the server and like willing to talk about their work. And I was like, oh, I engage with Dimitri and understand like, hey man, like what is this thing? And like, how does this work? And why is it the way it is? And like, what is this, strings wrapped around pegs concept? And like, it's like, oh, this is cool. And so I don't know, I had found that like pretty special and ended up being like, oh, I'm gonna, pull the trigger, buy a ringer. Like that's it felt like a crazy thing at the time. I think it was like 1 ETH. I was like, this is insane. But yeah,
When was that? Like, if you can timestamp that.
I think this is maybe like February of 2021, something like that, January of 2021. Yeah, and I think from there just was like, oh, this is really cool, like, and I don't know, just was like I, started minting things and became just like really excited about this experience of like being able to own something that was uniquely yours, but part of a bigger set. And that kind of, sparked in me like resparked kind of creative energy that I feel like I'd lost touch with, of being like, oh wait, like I have I can just like create visual art with code. Like I have things in my head that I want to create that feel like inspired by, things that I was missing during COVID, being locked in, missing like getting chances to be in, you know, like escape to the beach. I mean, places that are special to me in that respect. And like, you know, feelings very inspired by, I don't know, the screen printing mediums that I grew up around, and like trying to say like, oh, what would it look like to really create art that was, felt like it was in that, more in that like visual tradition in certain ways that are familiar to me. And so, yeah, I think like kind of went deep and broad as like, a collector and an artist, but also, yeah, like just getting really involved in the community and saying like, hey, how can I be helpful here? Can I help, help support the community, is just helping people as they're finding their way around. And I started like bugging Eric to be like, hey, like, let me fix your Discord bot. This is broken. I can fix this. Like, where can I be helpful? And yeah, ended up kind of forming a relationship with Eric that way, and starting to try to be helpful more on things in terms of like mechanism design and how the team was handling like chaos of oversubscribed mints at fixed prices, and being like, okay, well, these are the different types of auction things you can play around with. And yeah, just kind of starting from a place of being like, hey, where can I help the community, and kind of like, I don't know, supporting Eric's side of things. Yeah, kind of that's how I found my way to Artblocks as a team member. But then, as a collector, just was like, oh, there's a lot of really interesting art that's coming to Artblocks, but also just like across the ecosystem. Was like, oh, you have artists that are, like Death Beef, that are like, I don't know, doing things that are similar but different and unique in their own exciting ways. And like, yeah, I don't know, ended up finding some really cool and special like online friends just via Punks chat and the Artblocks community. And so I don't know, there's a lot of different. It was like almost like a shotgun spray of different like areas to go explore more, invest deeper from a like personal perspective, and trying to like do all of them, if that makes sense.
No, it's cool. I want to sort of dig in to various elements of it, but I think I forgot to ask you the question of what was actually your first NFT?
I think my first NFT was definitely like CryptoKitty in a wallet that I lost, and I don't know, like I don't think there was anything in there except for CryptoKitties. But I do like wonder sometimes. I'm like, I don't know, must have been like 3 computers ago or something. And then I ended up buying, I think in like maybe I don't know, 2018 or 2019, a bunch of Gods Unchained cards. And then my first, let's say, NFT that I still am holding on to or have access to can't remember if it was the ringer I bought or a color study by Jeff Davis that I minted. But yeah, I think it was the color study. I think I minted before I ended up like buying the ringer. But yeah.
Got it. And sounds like you're just a natural tinkerer and curious about the space. But was digital assets and NFTs like a challenging thing for you to wrap your head around, or was it sort of easy for you to get?
Yeah, I think like definitely easy from the perspective of already having been like pretty deeply pilled on digital money. Like I think if you start from the perspective of digital money making sense, then like digital culture and like cultural artifacts and assets are a lot easier to grok. I think if you start with the digital culture and artifacts, the money actually is easier to understand. And so I think that's where like NFTs have been more, let's say like mass market understandable because like they're more similar to things that people experience in like, you know, gaming or sneakers or like there's more analogs. Like money is something that like generally is just a confusing concept.
Yeah.
If you start to really like ask people like, hey, what exactly is money? Like it's a weird thing to try to think about for a lot of people. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think like for me having, I don't know, like already, let's say, accepted this idea that like, oh, you can make money that has value because it's like a peer-to-peer way to capture trust and, you know, trust has value, something like that. I don't know. Like I think it made the NFT stuff easier to understand. And yeah, I don't know. It was like really just finding stuff that was like more, let's say, resonant with my um, you know, what was on my radar, why like aesthetic preferences and interests and intellectual interests as a collector that like really I think sparked a deep rabbit hole dive in terms of like collecting. I've collected most of my collection is generative art stuff and yeah, kind of falling down that rabbit hole.
I think most people sort of find that same thing. I think it was NFT stats that said, NFTs was the first time people weren't talking about the technology. They were just talking about things that they can relate with, which is art and culture, which was a little bit of an easier onboarding sort of part for them as well. But oh, that's cool. And then just, going back to your art block sort of journey. I mean, so you were hanging out in the Discord, you're making yourself useful with I guess the community and with Eric. How did that conversation come about with you coming on to Art Blocks as a team member, like and obviously CTO? Like, was that long after your first entry after February 21?
Yeah, so I think I don't know when it was that like this formally was the case. Maybe it was like May or June or something like that of 2021 that I at first kind of more formally started, supporting our blocks just as an advisor. I don't know, was just like, very interested in the product and like trying to figure out how to be helpful. And, you know, Eric was interested in bringing me on as a technical advisor to help kind of give feedback on technical direction, more on, let's say, like the kind of smart contract and mechanism design side of things. And, that's where I started to get more directly involved. And then I think as things were really kind of growing really quickly for Art Blocks and Eric was looking to like more really scale up the team and needing more support from a technical like engineering perspective, that's when he kind of reached out and was like, hey, like, are you interested in coming on in more of a full-time capacity? And yeah, it was a pretty exciting opportunity from the perspective of getting to join, like a quickly growing and exciting organization. And so yeah, I joined full time actually just about 2 years ago. It's like August of 2021. Yeah.
What was the early vibe of Art Blocks like? Because I mean, I got into Art Blocks late, but I presume like the vibe would have been very similar to Punks at some stage, with some familiar faces, some really big early collectors in the space, just nerding out on sort of Art Blocks. Like, do you remember I guess the kind of people that were sort of in there at the time, and what was that sort of vibe like in Art Blocks?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was like really cool, and I think still is really cool, but it made me feel like less concentrated about early art blocks community was just like there's a lot of artists, and again, I think there still are a lot of artists who are like directly engaging in the community, like talking about their art, talking about the creative process, giving feedback, and like that I think was something that was like just this really intimate experience when it's only like a couple thousand people and really only like in terms of like highly active people, much fewer, maybe like less than 100 people or something. that are kind of like talking about, really digging into like the creative process, digging into like, all of the outputs of a given algorithm when a new project came live, and getting excited about like minting together and watching things come through the minter. And so, yeah, I think that, I don't know, like kind of almost like collaborative is not the right word, but like, yeah, that really intimate environment of collectors who are really excited about nerding out about the algorithms and the outputs and like kind of the algorithmic design space of a given, art piece, like combined with, artists being there and being willing, able to engage directly with those collectors. That was, I think, the thing to me that was like the most, I don't know, that like really captivated me and pulled me in. Yeah, and I think like, yeah, that's been something that like as the community has just grown, dramatically, in terms of the number of people kind of participating in that conversation, like how that's changed over time is I don't know, it's interesting to watch. Like I think there's, I think we've done a really good job of maintaining the aspects of that are possible in terms of like keeping, there's I think still a really strong community of like artists who are there as community members, but things just feel less intimate, obviously, when you have like tens of thousands of people, versus like, order of magnitude less. And so, that said, I think that community is still something that feels like very, I don't know, vibrant. And especially for the people who've been around for a long time is like special to kind of, yeah, still have those folks around. And so,
Yeah. I sort of feel like there's a very strong vibe correlation between punks and the art blocks community from a purist sense. I think most
sure.
people are there like nerding out because they want to and they're genuinely interested in the space and really excited about, the projects that are sort of coming out. And so I sort of feel like, with the art blocks community, there is a lot of crossover with punks. And I think, just speaking with yourself, how you went into art blocks first, and then I'd love to sort of, get into your punk story in a moment, but felt like Death Beef went through the same way. He went through art blocks first, then found out about punks, and then came across the punks as well. And so I think Snowfro starting off with punks, getting I get the sense that there was inspiration from punks that sort of drove elements of art blocks as well, right? So I think there's a nice sort of correlation between the two sort of projects there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like from my perspective, punks are very much like an algorithmic art piece, that is, yeah, I mean, I don't, not to be like overly reductionist or gatekeeping, but like I do think that there's a aspect to which like punks are like more, they were an art piece first that became, let's say, like a PFP project, almost like in a way that was much more like gradual and organic than kind of like most of the PFP projects we know today that were created as these like online brands. And I think that's, I don't know, there's something about that, I think, that draws many people who are interested in like digital art to punks as this, yeah, I don't know, like digital art piece that is super important to the medium of crypto art, and is also like very much resonates with people who are interested in generative algorithmic art, because punks at the end of the day are like a generative algorithmic art piece, even though they weren't generated on chain. They're the output of an algorithm that was then like, you know modified on chain, and yeah, which makes them similar in many ways to kind of art that, like it's released to be art blocks, even though they're obviously different in ways, for sure.
What's Snowfro like as a boss?
Eric is a very kind and compassionate person. And so, I think that really shows in terms of, yeah, what it's like working with him, on a colleague level, on a kind of like as a boss. I think he's someone who cares a lot about the team and cares a lot about, yeah, the people that he's working with, and is trying to, lead with empathy and kind of how he thinks about decisions. And so I don't know, that's probably the clearest through line that I would call out.
That sounds deserving of a pay rise and a bonus for next year.
But
I was hoping you'd give us a bit more insight, but I think it's hard to fault anything with Snowfro. I think anybody that's had any remote interaction with him has always said the same thing and speaks very very highly of him. So obviously, Def Beef and had Pixel Pete on as well. Just people in the whole art blocks sort of space are just harboring good vibes, not just about Snowfro, but around art blocks. So that's cool.
yeah, he's a very genuine person, and I think that genuineness and authenticity like shows up in kind of, I don't know, values of the art block community as a whole, and the type of people that he's attracted. the type of community that's kind of been fostered there. And so, yeah, hopefully that kind of is something that percolates out into the world when people interact with art blocks.
So what is your punk story, Pat? Like, how did you hear about punks? How did you sort of, get into it and eventually buy your first one?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Hear About Punks was probably like, I don't know, exposed to them around the same time as exposed to CryptoKitties, and just like didn't take that branch. I was like, oh, these things are like fun and cute, and I don't know, whatever. But I think like following along crypto Twitter, there were people that, like Alex Gauss or like DC Investor, just different people that like, I don't know, I'd ended up finding myself following along with, that like use CryptoPunks as avatars. I was like, oh, that's cool. These are cool. Like, these are, an OG, like original, I don't know, like crystallized moment of what crypto culture means, what crypto art means. And so I think from that perspective, like they were, really interesting. And I like January 2021, or maybe even like late 2020, was like, should I buy a CryptoPunk? Like, kind of stupid that I like, I'm like a investor in the space, and, like mostly just stick to ETH and maybe a little bit of DeFi. Like, but like I really should own CryptoPunk. And I was like, this is like so expensive. Like, it seems so crazy. So I don't know. I did it for a long time, and, ended up watching the price kind of escape my horizon of like things that were, made sense, were feasible. But found the punks community, like punks chat, via, I don't know, like some Discord portal or something, from like, you're like into our plus Discord, somebody posts a link talking about something happening in punks chat. Like, what are you talking about? And they send you a link and you're like, oh, this, there's a crypto punks chat. And I don't know, I found like that place is a really fun place to hang out, in terms of like, I don't know, having a little bit more of like a DGen culture, let's say, than like let's say the Art Blocks Discord had, which was like much more art focused. And, just finding people who were like really willing to help kind of give like pointers and advice in terms of like the market, and like we're just also like interesting, curious, fun people to chat with, and that I've become, friends with online, and kind of still am friends with online, though, a lot of that conversation maybe has moved out of Punk's chat to other places. But yeah, like found myself just really liking that community. And then, eventually, after like finding my way, flipping different things and building up a more of an ETH stack, where I'm like, okay, I can actually, get a Punk now. I think maybe the Punk's price was like 15 ETH or something like this. And I was like, yeah, this feels crazy, but like, I really want a Punk. And at the time there was like nothing and I'm at around the floor that like I was like, oh, like that I liked. And it was at a time where this is now like very different, but the NFTX was, I think, still on like the version 1 of the protocol. There was a pool for punks, an NFTX pool for punks that was like, let's say, like not very efficiently arbitraged, is how I would describe it, from the perspective of like having a lot of, let's say, like nicer trait punks that were just like mixed in. Nowadays, if you look at the NFTX pool, it's much more efficiently arbitraged, and there's like not, let's say, like more valuable premium trait punks in the pool. But at the time was like, oh wait, like, this is not, there's some nice stuff in the pool, including 6303. And so I ended up buying, maybe I think I bought a floor punk, or maybe I bought like one whole NFTX punk token. And it was really like fun night in CryptoPunks chat. So I was like, hey guys, like, I'm gonna fish the pool and kind of like roll the dice until I get something that I want. And so like there were a lot of, folks hanging out, like, I don't know, I remember D's and he and Jeeves and Big Nay, like friends, friends now that are, I don't know, other online punk friends, or friends that came out of Punk's chat. But I think it was on the third roll that I like would put the thing in, and then you just kind of do like random draw, and it gives you a punk, and you're like, should I keep this one or not? And I remember like people in the chat being like, oh, that's a pretty good one. Like, you sure you want to put it back? And, ended up, I think, on the third pull getting the 6303 that I have now, the purple hat punk. And I was like, this is too sick. Like, purple hat is a really cool trait. Like, there shouldn't even be purple hats in the pool. And yeah, I don't know, kind of like luck of the draw in that respect, that I ended up getting that one. And yeah.
So what was NFTX? Because I've never actually used it. I've heard of it before, but so there's a pool of punks. You basically
Yeah.
just pop your ETH in and you get out a random. Is it like a gumball machine or something?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. So like, NFTX is this protocol where it's almost like NFT backed fungible tokens. So like you'll put in your punk and then you'll get like one ERC token that represents a whole punk. And then you can sell, fractions of that token. And if somebody else buys enough to have one whole token, that they can put that token back in and get like a random gumball punk back. That's how the original version of the protocol worked. Now it's like a little bit more complicated, and you can like choose to pay a premium to select specific pieces out of the vault, and so like more efficient in that respect. Even on the old V1 version of NFTX, like pretty quickly that started to become something that people would like, kind of like EV arbitrage. So you'd be like, okay, what's the fees and the gas that it's going to cost to like keep spinning the wheel, and then like what is the probability that I get one of this set of different punks that's in the pool, and what do I think the premium is on those, and like I'm gonna do that until I get one of the good ones, and then like sell it on the punks market for this spread and whatever, right? So like that type of thing started to happen more and more. And I was just lucky that at the time where I was buying my punk, that was like not a very efficient market yet. Yeah, it's almost kind of like D's was early on, like had a really good sense of kind of market making punks and knowing where there was a premium and kind of making like um, small spread flips. And then like over time, the punk market as a whole just became like much, much more efficient. You have players like, OTC coming in and like using bots and, um, you know, so like things have just become much more efficient as a market in terms of punks. But early on, that was not the case. And you could be like, oh, there's a bunch of nice stuff in. I'm going to like spin the wheel and play the gumball machine. And that's kind of what I did, and ended up getting my punk.
What was the floor for a punk token by NFTX back then?
I think I think it was like around 15 or something. It was like basically very similar to, there's a very like efficient, or roughly efficient market, at least between like the floor price and on the punks marketplace contract and around the punks contract. And then, what was happening on FTX. Cause like you could always, if the spread was too big, you could buy the floor and sell it into NFTX, or vice versa, buy the NFTX token and floor it on the punks marketplace. And so, it was always within half an ETH or something like that. And it's probably even tighter these days, but
Ah, that's cool.
yeah, especially with things like Blur, like the market. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Just like thinking about the span of 2 years, let's say, like how much more efficient like market for punts has gotten is kind of a trip.
Yeah. So this was around March 2021. I'm just looking at the history now.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That's cool. So it sounded like it was fate that brought you together with 6303.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I think like I don't know. There's just definitely some special like sentimental aspect there of like, well, I didn't exactly pick my punk. It kind of picked me, and then I chose not to throw it back or something like that.
And so DSFI was your trait advisor at the time. So he helped you sort of figure out which ones to keep and which ones to throw back into the pool.
Yeah, he definitely was. He also was someone that was, I don't know, pretty active in Punk Shop by that. And I can't remember like who all was in the chat actively being like keep it or not, but it was a pretty like listen to the crowd kind of situation for sure.
How funny. Were there sort of any traits that you were keen on specifically at that time, like outside of purple hats?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember what was the cool. Like, I know I really like, and I still like the wild hair trait. I don't have long hair anymore, but I used to have long hair. I really like the knitted cap trait. Like, that's a fun one. I don't know. I like the eye patch trait, but yeah, I was not going to get a cowboy out of the pool, but I do like the cowboy trait quite a bit.
Yeah, they're cool too. Ah, man.
Yeah, I almost bought. There's a cowboy punk that Death Beef has that I don't know, almost bought when it went on sale at one point, and then did not. And I tried to hassle him into selling it to me, but he wouldn't.
You know what's funny? Was that recent? Because there was one that was listed at 99, and
Oh no,
this is a while
no,
back.
he bought
Okay.
another one I think recently that he like duped, but no, this was maybe sometime in 2021 still actually, like before pumps really went hyperbolic. Yeah, and it was maybe like 40 or something. I don't remember, but it's the small shades cowboy that he has.
Ah, that's cool. Yeah, he recently picked up a cowboy with I think an earring and a mustache. and I think it was listed for like 99 recently, and I was like scrambling around for some ETH, and then before I was able to scrape enough, Def Beaver just sort of scooped in. I think he's got like 2 or 3 Cowboys now, so yeah, he's a Cowboy fan. Um,
It's a good trade. I really like the Cowboys.
yeah, and if money wasn't an issue, like, would there be a dream punk you'd love to have?
I think if money wasn't an issue, I'd want the one that the Cowboy the deputy has. Because maybe if money wasn't an issue, I could convince him to sell it. But I really like the Small Shades Cowboy. That's probably like the punk that got away. One of my favorites. Yeah, I think like true grail punk, if money wasn't an issue, is the Cowboy Ape. I think I like apes more than aliens, so I'd say Cowboy Ape. But I don't think that's.
You wouldn't go for B's purple hat ape, so you can keep your perp hat name?
I don't think so. Like as much as I do love the Perp Hat name, I think I would sell my identity and my soul for the right cowboy.
Nice. So one thing we didn't speak about, just going back a little bit, is into your art block sort of journey history. You're obviously an artist as well, and you've released a few drops on art blocks. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? So I've got one up called Sonoran Roadways, and I know you've done a few other ones too around sunsets as well. But like, I guess how would you describe your form of and your style of art blocks, and how did you sort of get into this sort of type of work?
Yeah. I'll have to dig up my old punks that I'd had in the past later because I'm too difficult to try to find them on the CryptoPunks market on my iPad. But yeah, for me, I think I've been, I don't know, I think there's maybe a few things that I could talk about, but like, one has been, I find it really like useful to think about constraints driving creativity. And so like, I think one thing early on that I just kind of set as a constraint for myself in terms of like the type of algorithmic work I want to create was like, I'm going to work in just like painting with dots. And like, the only primitive I'm going to use from the perspective of like what gets, put on canvas is dots. And I'm going to kind of take that and approach what I'm making from the perspective of like, I want to make something that tries to emulate screen printing, but like doesn't exactly make sense if you think about it too much because it's not really a screen print. But, I'm going to kind of take that into how I approach the creative process and kind of build like these digital silk screens where the dots get kind of like painted on as the different pieces of code that say like where the different screens are and how they overlap get kind of iterated through. And I think that was coming from the perspective of just being really informed and inspired by the screen printing work that I grew up with and like getting to spend time with my grandpa in his basement studio where he had like screen like supplies and walked me through like, hey, like this is how lithography works versus like screen prints, and like yeah, I don't know, that was like just something that was very ingrained in my brain. And so yeah, trying to create works that like felt like they were let's say like emulating that style in certain respects, pulling in certain aspects of quilt making, kind of the patchwork nature of that, while like depicting scenes or ideas that were like interesting and meaningful to me. And so like, my first 3 art blocks projects were this triptych around kind of 3 different like places and spaces that feel like home to me in different respects. And so like the beach being like home to escape to and kind of, yeah, get away to, if you will. The desert being like the home that I grew up in, growing up in Southern Arizona most of my life. And then, the mountains being the home that I live in now and living in Colorado, or like the home away from home, I guess, the things that make me feel like home, getting out into nature in each of those contexts. And so, yeah, I think that's been, a through line, I guess, is like trying to create work that has let's say, certain aspects or motifs that are consistent, but explore, different ideas or try to evoke different emotions in terms of like the places they transport you to. And I've tried to, yeah, apply that in kind of how I think about the generative work that I've done in art blocks. Also, like had, I don't know, generative works that I've made that are more like curated outputs in some of the work that I've done making like fake rare Pepe kind of inspired art. And like, I find that out of collective storytelling and like this collective storybook character almost of Pepe to be like a fun thing. And so, yeah, participating in that, but with my own kind of like style that comes from this kind of constraints around dot painting and trying to apply a digital process that pulls from screen printing in certain ways in terms of what it tries to evoke, but also like doesn't really make sense because like you can't skeuomorphically translate printmaking to a digital context fully. Like I think that's kind of been my process in a lot of ways.
I think as you're sort of talking, it provides a little bit more context to, I guess, what I'm sort of seeing, and it does have a very strong sense of home as I'm looking through them, and I think as you're sort of talking about quilt making is very homely, right? So, which is kind of nice. No, so they're sort of beautiful pieces. I think I did pick up a Center and Roadways as well. But what was your first one? First one, was it the dot matrix?
So it was, Stipple Sunsets was the first project that I did on Art Blocks.
Oh wow, okay,
And
that's cool.
yeah,
Oh, nice. And like, I guess, do you have like a favorite artist or any sort of collections that sort of come to mind that stand out for you?
oh man, picking favorites is hard. I think I really love Meridians by Matt Delorier. I like love having them on my wall. I think the one of the I really like works. I try to do this in my like. I hope that my work, at least for some people, creates a sensation where like your experience looking at the thing close up and far away is just different, and you get to like enjoy that sense of perspective and scale. And that's something that I think like Matt does excellently and Meridians do excellently. And I love having some prints of Meridians up. Oh, they're not in this room, but up in our house, and like being able to, from a distance, they're just like beautiful, striking, topographical kind of depictions of mountain scenery. But then you get close and you really get to, I don't know, like enjoy these like digital brushstrokes almost. So those are, I think, really fantastic. I love Jeff Beef's work in particular. Like I love glitch boxes. I think they're just like a really fun and interesting, dynamic and interactive art piece. And like I think it's cool that you can sit and kind of remix, remaster them as the collector and like get to engage and re-engage with them. And yeah, I feel like the aspects of how Dev Beef thinks about on-chain art from the perspective of works that can be created with a C compiler, like something really cool about kind of how he's approached that as a creator. And so, you know, that's a really prized, let's say, like aspect of my collection. Yeah, I don't know. Picking favorites is hard, but yeah, I think those are some pieces that are really special. I really love gazers. I think like the fact that I just get to look at them, and they give me something different every time I look at them is pretty special. Yeah, so I like those. I mean, the hard thing with gazers is that like I still haven't exactly found the right way to display them live in real time in our house in a way that's not too blinding because of the backlight. Like for a long time, I had a separate monitor that I would just keep my gazers up all the time on, and it was like it's just too bright. And so I think, yeah, I think as we get better in terms of like the technology to display the live code running on some of those like flatter, more matte displays, yeah, excited to be able to live with those in a better way. But I still love like my gazer and being able to like I don't know, also like have pieces of art that you can't really like put on the wall in a flat context is kind of cool. Like, I like that about Glitchbox. I like that about Gazers. I like that about punks. Honestly, I'm like, I don't want to my punk in a little frame. Like, that's not really right. But like it, I love my CryptoPunk. So yeah, I don't know. Those are some of the things that like most immediately come to mind. But
No, I think Meridians is a beautiful collection. Actually, all three of those collections are sort of amazing, and McCain's got such an interesting story and a purist artist in his truest form. Once you sort of learn his backstory as well,
yeah,
so yeah, I think really nice sort of curation that you got there.
yeah. There's a lot of other stuff too that I love that I don't own or don't own anymore. But so that's always a factor too.
I think that's always the problem, right? I don't think we've ever got enough ETH to buy all the things we love, right? So
Yeah, managing financial responsibility and love of collecting is a difficult balance for
tell,
sure.
absolutely. And probably more worse so for you because you get to see everything firsthand that's coming out and what's sort of coming up, right? So I can sort of imagine that
Yeah,
that sort of tendency.
Yeah, I've
Um,
tried to control myself more, especially since joining the team in terms of just like, okay, I, got a balance there. How exposed I am to different things.
if you had to, look across the community of punks, do you have like a favorite punk or series of punks that come to mind?
I mean, I think like what's cool about the punks community is you have like a lot of folks who are building shit, right? Like, so that's I think like a lot of the people that I really like to engage with in the punks community are like people who are building stuff. So like that's how Eric and I found each other. I think like folks like Fubar, like a really smart Solidity dev and like really thinks critically about kind of things around mechanism design and I don't know, like is building in the space. Cool to get to engage with him or like, you know, Nifty Nod is building in the, like in the space and very active and like I think just I don't know, being surrounded by those type of folks is great. I think there's also, like the really deep OG thought leader folks who are maybe like less directly involved in like the community on a day to day, like, I don't know, perspective in terms of what's still happening in Punk's chat or something like that. But like, folks like Aaron Wright, like getting to, engage with him. He's a really sharp dude and really understands space and like values around decentralization. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's a pretty cool perspective to get. And then like, I don't know, I think there's a lot of folks who are just like more friends or like, a fellow collector slash investor slash degen slash friends like D's or Jeebs or he doesn't own a punk anymore. Maybe he'll come back to the punk side eventually. Flirts with the idea from time to time, it seems like. But yeah, I think like I don't know. Those getting to hang out with those folks like just online as online friends is I think a pretty special thing. So I don't know. I think like picking favorites there is even more difficult than picking favorites when it comes to art. But I would say like there's a lot of just really like cool and thoughtful collectors, artists, artist collectors, builders, thinkers, like in the space that also are part of the punk community, and it's like a pretty cool thing.
Are you in any tribute DAOs? Because yeah, I'm a big fan of Aaron as well. So
Yeah, I'm a part of Neon DAO, which is one of the Trinity DAOs. But yeah, it's the only one.
cool. Well, maybe I can catch up with you at a tribute event one day. And if you had to describe punk culture in a few words, like how would you describe it for you?
I think that like the what seems to be the most unifying through line, I would probably index on like decentralization maxis or something like that. Like I do get the sentiment that like there are a lot of people in the punks community who like value, let's say like combination of decentralization is one, and then I'd say like authenticity is another. Like I think people gravitate towards punks because they are this like very authentic, yeah, or like they came from a very let's say like organic and genuine, I don't like to use the word pure, but like space in terms of like, hey, like here's this thing. You can own these, like collectible art piece things on the Ethereum blockchain. And it's a contract and part of the contract has its own marketplace. We're tinkerers, we're builders, we're creatives. And like, here's the thing. I don't know. They're free. Do something with it. And like that evolved into this symbol, this shelling point for like digital art and culture. And so, I think that draws people who like care about authenticity and also like just given the kind of like, hey, this thing's out in the world and like the token is the art, you own the token, and like the marketplace is built into the contract. Like you don't have to depend on other shit. Like it's all there in the thing you own. I don't know. That being attractive to you is, I think, like something that relies you being somewhat bought in on kind of principles around decentralization and around like what it means for something to be authentic. And so I don't know. Those are the things that I would probably describe as like the commonalities that often I find in I don't know, folks in the punks community that like resonates with me.
Yeah, I think as you're sort of describing that, you're right. I think at the surface level, when people come into punks, I don't think they really peel the onion back and really figure out what punks are. And I think when you're sort of describing it, I sort of get the sense that punks are very symbolic of crypto values, decentralization, on-chain authenticity, provenance, self-custody. It's very symbolic of those crypto values, which is a very strong not flex, but a way of communicating who you are in the space in some ways, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a very strong like value signal around some of those like crypto values, and that's what I'm here for. And I mean, I think that's the thing that's like fundamentally interesting about owning digital cultural artifacts is like they allow you to signal to the world like, hey, this is who I am. These are the things I care about, right? And so like, that may be like, hey, I really care about this brand or this club or this artist or this art form or you know crypto values or nihilistic like financial nihilism, whatever. Right? Like, there's different things that communicate like, hey, I'm part of this tribe, and I think like you know, communities drift and shift over time for sure. But I do think that like, for myself at least, why like CryptoPunk is interesting and meaningful as like a, I don't know, identity object or cultural value signaling object is like that I do think it signals some values around, yeah, kind of like crypto culture and um the values around things like, yeah, decentralization and like what crypto authenticity means and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think fairness is another one as well. And I think all the things around the punk history around, being a free, fair launch, all of those things signal elements of decentralization and openness and fairness and community as well. So yeah, no, this is going deep into punk. So you're not just buying a punk just for the art anymore. It's a
Yeah.
lot more than that.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the fact that punks are like a project where the marketplace is built into the contract that is the art piece. Like there's something very like special and unique about that, especially relative to the kind of Cambrian explosion of other stuff that does not follow that model, which is, for reasons that make sense. But like, I don't know, there's something that's like really fundamentally interesting about the like OpenSea can blow up and disappear, Blur can blow up and disappear. The whole ecosystem can shift and change and look entirely different in like, 10 years. But like, I don't know, like CryptoPunk's contract's still going to be there. And if the front end goes down, like I promise you, someone will put up another one that looks the same, uh, that lets you see all of the punks and look them up by index and, interact with the marketplace because it's built in, it's the same, it's one and the same, with the art pieces themselves. And like, there's something interesting about that. That's just fundamentally a little bit different than most of the other stuff in the space. I don't know. It's cool, at the very least.
Totally. Do you have a view on V1 punks?
Yeah, I mean, I think like this might be like an overly it's not maybe I think this is almost certainly like an overly reductive and cynical take, but like I do think the fact that like most people didn't care about or have an interest in talking about V1 punks until like there was a narrative to spin in terms of why they were valuable is interesting. Like I think the general like outlook of like, hey, the things that we care about and are collecting and trading in the punks community and in the punks chat were the V2 punks until there was, much more of a dramatic, let's say like value accrual to those. And I was like, oh, well, what about these? Wrap them now so we can trade them again. I don't know. Like they are, from my perspective, interesting cultural, historical artifacts. I think they're like fundamentally a broken art piece in terms of like they're not, accepted as being the art piece that is the authentic by the creators who created them. I think that like the punk's art piece is like like the punk's contract, and you get to, from my perspective, like when you're owning a punk, you're owning like a specific fractional relationship with this like smart contract, and that is like an interesting thing, and that is like fundamentally broken with V1 punks because you can't trade them safely and the marketplace is broken. And so, like, from that perspective, like V1 punks in my mind are like the prototype, but they're not the actual thing. And like functionally, that is what happened in the history of punks, where like, everybody got their punks, but on the new contract, and everyone said like, yep, this is what's canon, right? And this is what we're going to socially accept and negotiate on. That said, like, I think it'd be cool if I had like 6303 for my, for the V1 punk. Like it'd be neat to have them together in the same wallet. And so like there is some, it's not insane to me that people associate value with these things. Like I think there's definitely, just from a sentimental perspective, I understand that with my own punk, but I don't see it as something that I'm like, I don't know, I don't ascribe a high amount of economic value to wanting to own that thing, I guess is how I would think about it, or like analytical perspective. But yeah, I don't know. I think my outlook is definitely tainted by the narrative that is tried to be sold and who's tried to sell it, I guess, from the perspective of like, I don't know, Hemba. My like take is like, hey, this person like made a bunch of money but sold all his punks too early and is kind of salty and is like, oh, I own all this stuff. I'm gonna like create a narrative around this other thing that I own. It's like, oh, it's two people. Which is, again, maybe you're almost certainly overly reductive. Because there are people that, I do like really respect that have a different narrative that they associate with the V1 punks, and like they're the thing that they actually claimed, and that is meaningful. Like people like Moxley or Tony Herrera, or like, hey, I claimed this thing, and I did interact with this contract, and that's in the history, and that's interesting. And so like, what I would say is like, I think V1 punks are much more interesting and authentic and meaningful for the people who claim them, but like they're less interesting from the perspective of like other people collecting them. Is kind of how I think about it. Like, like that's not the thing. That's not the bearer instrument that like carries the meaning and the value. Just not. So I don't know.
No, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it, and I just love asking this question from various sort of punks because they come in with sort of various sort of views,
Yeah.
and I think it's one of those conversations that we'll continue to have from now until forever, right? The good
Punks are
thing.
like the Ethereum classic of of digital art, something like that. Like, yeah, I guess you still have your balance on like, Ethereum classic because the chain forked, but like, I don't know.
Yeah. And what about the Yuga acquisition? Now, how did you feel about the Yuga acquisition over CryptoPunks at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like unfortunate that Larva Labs guys got to a point where like I think the demands of what people were expecting from the perspective of running a community and running a PFP project, um, were just like not really what they set out to do as artists and creators. And so like, I think that to me from the outside just seemed like part of the forcing function as to like why they look to sell. Yeah, I don't know why they look to sell the kind of the IP and the bunch of punks that they sold to Yuga. I mean, I think from the perspective of like being good custodians of the brand, custodians of like honestly just like leaving punks alone for the most part and looking for, opportunities to place punks in important institutions and, like elevate punks as an art piece. I think Yuga's done a good job. And I've been honestly like happily surprised in that respect. It's kind of like, oh, like, Yuga is a very different, the other things they're doing are very different than what is interesting and attractive to me about CryptoPunks. Like they're building this digital online kind of like lifestyle culture brand thing that doesn't necessarily resonate with me personally. And, is that what's going to happen to punks, or like, how is that going to unfold? And so there's a lot of uncertainty there that I think is like played out in, I don't know, a way that has been pretty respectful. Like, oh, we're going to treat these things as an art piece and kind of elevate and maintain their history. I think, yeah, first was, just kind of like, I'm skeptical. Is this good or bad? Good for price, bad for price, like good for culture, bad for culture, unclear. Yeah, I think it's still, I don't know, too soon to tell like what that story will look like in retrospect in 10 years, right? Like, does it stay with does the Punks IP stay with the Yuga brand? Does it get resold and tossed around? And how does that feel? What does that look like? Does it matter because like people just more and more dissociate who it even is that owns the Punk IP from like what actually matters? I don't know. But yeah, I think it's been interesting, I guess I'll say. Like, I think initially my gut reaction, knee-jerk reaction was like sad and annoyed and angry. And, over time I've been like, I don't know. I don't know how much this matters, honestly. And I think it's good to not have, the Larva Labs folks feeling pressured into a situation that isn't maybe necessarily what they wanted. And so like, I'm glad that, hopefully that's been good for them, I guess.
And if you could pass on a message to the next owner of Punk 6303, what would you like to say to them?
Oh man. Have good wallet, operational security. I don't know. It depends on what the context is. It might be like, fuck you, because the reason they own it is I messed up my key management somehow, and I've like had all my wallets drained. And if that was the context, then I would probably be like, yeah, it would be a fuck you. If it was that they bought it from me and it was like some big life changing chunk of money, it'd be a thank you, and I hope you enjoy it, keep it well. If it's like one of my kids or something, it'd be like, good luck, don't mess up your key management. I don't know.
Oh, good. No, I think most people have this similar sort of answer to you, depending on the context of it. But fuck you was a general sort of similar one that sort of came out.
Seems like the most likely reason is that I messed something up and I compromised my keys, so I probably would be pretty upset.
Well, Jake, Perpat, this is sort of fun, man, and really fascinating to hear your story. From your early days engineering with haptics and Google, all the way through to sort of art blocks, and I think it's really great to sort of see people like you in rocking a punk, and also doing the things that you do, man. I think you're doing us really proud, building some really amazing products. And so thank you so much for your time, and really enjoyed having you on Punkcast. But I guess throwing over to you for one last time, any sort of final closing comments, and what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I was like getting to chat with other punks and just kind of chat about the space. So I appreciate you having me on. Best way to find me, I'm Perpat on Twitter. Twitter's probably the easiest way to get hold of me. And always happy to chat with folks who have interesting stuff to talk about. I don't know. I think the only thing I'd made like parting thought is like, I feel like it's a pretty I don't know, dark time in some respects within the cryptoverse. And I think that can, be like not fun of a feeling at times for folks. And so good to try to channel that energy into like communities that you can find excitement and energy from. And, like whether that be the Art Blocks community or, getting involved in more like direct artist community relationships. So find yourself in the Deaf Peak server, find yourself in the Map Castle server. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening there. Like find an art piece that speaks to you, that you want to go engage with the creators and learn about what they're making, even if you're not ready to buy something yet. Like it's a good time for that type of activity. So I just encourage folks to do that rather than being, let's say, too dark and blue at times where things can feel a bit like that, just in terms of the general ecosystem.
I feel the times are changing though, which is a good thing. I think we're just on the verge of bottoming out. I think I feel like it's sort of starting to come back.
Yeah, it's hard to, I have some PTSD from 2018.
We're going to come back very, very soon. But Perpat, thanks again. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Punkcast. And we'll be back next week with another punk. Bye for now.